Summer is upon us. Do you want to stay cool and dry at night? Try bamboo sheets from CozyEarth.com. Not only do you get a good night's sleep and stay cool and dry, but also you get to save 21% off just by using our code at checkout. InfoGo. And they have a 100-night sleep trial, so it's a win-win. If you don't like them, send them back, but I promise you'll fall in love with them. And while you're over there, check out their socks. They have a whole line of apparel. And that's CozyEarth.com. Use our code InfoGo at checkout to save 21% off. Welcome to the podcast. I'm William.
And I'm Kat,
And that makes this Info on the Go.
feeding your curiosity wherever you go.
Wherever you go. Like you can take us with your phone, you can put us in your car, but whatever you're doing, make sure you hit that follow button so you can take us with us and you don't miss an episode, right?
Right.
So today, in honor of Juneteenth, we thought we would do the Emancipation Proclamation. This episode is going to take us back to one of the most defining moments in American history, a moment that's often celebrated, sometimes, a lot of times misunderstood, but it's always worth revisiting with fresh eyes and open hearts.
So, William, did the Emancipation Proclamation end slavery once and for all?
The short answer is no, but it was the beginning of a bold, moral, and strategic first step to, well, a more unified nation.
In a time of war, when the future of the Union hung in the balance, President Abraham Lincoln took a stand that changed the course of history.
Hey, I have a quick factoid for you.
Hmm.
What U.S. president was inducted into the Wrestling Hall of Fame? The only president, Abraham Lincoln.
Really?
Yeah, he really is.
I did not know that.
You do your factoid thing.
Factoid.
There you go. So the Emancipation Proclamation was not just ink on paper. It was a promise, a declaration of intent that gave hope to millions. It struck fear in the hearts of slaveholders and forever reshaped purpose of the Civil War.
But what exactly was the Emancipation Proclamation?
What power did it truly hold?
And how did it pave the way to the 13th Amendment and the abolition of slavery across the United States?
We're here to kind of break down the legal, political, and emotional weight of this monumental document.
We'll uncover how executive orders, proclamations, and memoranda differ and how Lincoln wielded his authority, not just as a president, but as a wartime leader with deliberate and lasting impact.
And also as a wrestling Hall of Famer. So settle in. We're about to journey through one of the most powerful chapters in American history.
Let's dive into the Emancipation Proclamation. Before we get started, let's define the following: executive orders, proclamations, and executive memoranda. While all three are issued by the president, they have distinct characteristics.
So let's start with the executive orders. So, executive orders are directed to government officials and agencies. They hold the force of law if based on constitutional or statutory authority and must be published in the Federal Registry and the Code of Federal Regulations.
Proclamations usually address activities of private individuals, lack the force of law unless backed by constitutional or statutory authority, and are often ceremonial today.
And executive memoranda, well, they are similar to executive orders, but are not required to be published in the Federal Registry. They do not need to cite the president's legal authority. And the Office of Management and Budget, well, does not need to issue a budgetary impact statement for the executive memoranda.
So, while presidents debated authority and Congress argued over language, emancipation wasn't an abstract idea to the people living it. For enslaved families, freedom didn't arrive with a trumpet blast or a signed document, it arrived in fragments.
A whispered rumor carried down a dirt road, a Union soldier reading from a paper no one had ever been allowed to see before. Plantations suddenly abandoned as Confederate forces retreated. A choice: stay and hope, or flee and risk everything.
Freedom often meant walking away with nothing but the clothes you wore. It meant hunger, uncertainty, and danger, and yet people walked. Parents carried children for miles. Elderly men leaned on sticks. Women crossed rivers not knowing what waited on the other side.
And the Emancipation Proclamation, it didn't guarantee safety. It didn't guarantee land. It didn't guarantee equality. What it guaranteed was possibility. And for millions, that was enough to risk everything.
So, the Emancipation Proclamation issued by President Abraham Lincoln on January 1st, 1863, was not a law passed by Congress, but a presidential executive order. It declared that enslaved people in the Confederate States were free, serving as wartime measure to aid the Union in the Civil War.
Although the proclamation did not abolish slavery, it altered the legal status of enslaved individuals in the Confederate States that were part of a broader strategy of military emancipation. It also encouraged enslaved people to escape to Union lines and join the Army.
One of the hardest truths to accept is that Lincoln couldn't simply declare slavery. One of the hardest truths to accept is that Lincoln couldn't simply declare slavery legal everywhere, not because he lacked conviction, but because the Constitution restrained him. The presidency is powerful, but not absolute. So if Lincoln had overstepped his authority, the courts or a future president could have undone emancipation with the stroke of a pen. And that's why the Emancipation Proclamation was crafted as a wartime necessity. It was emancipation tied to survival. By linking freedom to military victory, Lincoln made emancipation inseparable from Union success. Win the war, and slavery collapses with it. Lose the war, and the proclamation becomes meaningless. It was a gamble, and it worked.
Here's where we have to stop and recognize a pivotal step toward abolishing slavery. The proclamation led Lincoln to advocate for the 13th Amendment, which permanently ended slavery in 1865. The Emancipation Proclamation, officially known as Proclamation 95, was a presidential executive order. It changed the legal status of over 3.5 million enslaved African Americans in the Confederate States from enslaved to free.
Once enslaved individuals escaped to Union lines or as Union troops advanced, they became permanently free. Additionally, the proclamation allowed former slaves to join the U.S. Armed Forces. This measure significantly contributed to ending slavery in the U.S. The proclamation was issued in two parts: a preliminary version on September 22nd, 1862, and the final version on January 1st, 1863. Lincoln listed the 10 states still in rebellion and declared all enslaved people within those states as free.
So the executive branch, including the Army and Navy, was directed to recognize and maintain their freedom. Although it could not be enforced in areas still under Confederate control, the proclamation provided a legal framework for liberating enslaved individuals as the Union Army advanced. So the Emancipation Proclamation was met with mixed reactions. It really outraged white Southerners while energizing abolitionists and dissuading European support for the Confederacy.
As the ink dried on the Emancipation Proclamation, one voice rang louder than most in celebration: Frederick Douglass. But Douglass didn't just applaud the moment, he had helped make it possible. From the earliest days of the Civil War, Douglass had urged President Lincoln to see the fight not just as a battle to save the Union, but as a moral war to end slavery. He argued again and again that the Union could never truly be whole while millions remained in bondage.
In his fiery speeches and the pages of Douglass Monthly, he declared, "The war for the Union, whether men so call it or not, is a war for emancipation." So for Douglass, emancipation was not a political strategy, it was a moral imperative. And when Lincoln issued the proclamation on January 1st, 1863, Douglass called it the greatest event of our nation's history, if not the greatest event of the century. But he didn't stop there.
Douglas turned his attention to the battlefield because becoming one of the leading voices urging African American men to enlist in the Union Army. In broadsides titled Men of Color to Arms, he encouraged Black Americans to seize their freedom through action. He who would be free, he wrote, must strike the blow.
So for Douglas, military service was more than patriotism. It was proof of black courage, black manhood, and the right to full citizenship.
His commitment was personal too. Two of his sons, Charles and Lewis Douglas, enlisted in the now legendary 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, the first official Black regiment raised in the North. Their bravery, especially during the assault on Fort Wagner, helped change public perception about Black soldiers and paved the way for nearly 200,000 Black men to join the Union ranks by the war's end.
There was a backlash here because emancipation was, well, it also unleashed fear and violence. As black men began wearing Union blue, Confederate leaders declared they were not to treat them as soldiers. Captured black troops were often executed or sold back into slavery. White officers commanding black regiments were sometimes killed on sight. And the most infamous example came at Fort Pillow in 1864, where Confederate forces, well, they massacred surrendering black soldiers. Freedom, once named, was violently contested. But even that brutality revealed the truth. The Confederacy understood exactly how dangerous emancipation was to their cause. Slavery wasn't just labor, it was power. And emancipation, well, it threatened to destroy that power.
And Douglas didn't just shape public opinion, he shaped policy. He met with President Lincoln on multiple occasions, pressing for equal pay and fair treatment of Black soldiers. In one powerful meeting in 1864, Lincoln even shared a radical plan with Douglas to send Black agents behind Confederate lines to spread word of emancipation and urge enslaved people to flee to Union territory. It was a rare alliance between a sitting president and a formerly enslaved man, but one that reshaped the future of the nation.
And Frederick Douglass, he understood exactly what was at stake. The Emancipation Proclamation wasn't the end of the story, but with his voice, his vision, and his relentless pursuit of justice, Douglass, well, he helped ensure it was the beginning of a new one. It encouraged many African Americans to escape slavery and join the Union Army. And this historic document redefined the Civil War, shifting the focus from preserving the Union, well, to ending slavery.
To permanently abolish slavery, Lincoln pushed for the 13th Amendment, which was passed by Congress in 1865, ratified by the states later that year, making slavery and involuntary servitude unconstitutional except as punishment for a crime. The United States Constitution of 1787 did not explicitly mention slavery, but it included provisions regarding unfree persons.
You know, I think here we should take a break before we get into the three-fifths compromise. What do you
Okay,
think?
sounds good.
All right, we'll be right back.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
I came across Big Fork Brands recently, and it's become one of those finds you actually want to tell people about, and you don't find that often. Okay. They're doing bacon sausage, plus these really solid pork jerky snacks and Chicago style sauces. Basically, upgrade anything you throw them on burgers, hot dogs, fries, throw it on there. It works.
But I bet it's packed full of junk.
Actually, it's made with clean ingredients and real care. That's small batch with no shortcuts, and people are obsessed with the flavor. You can go over to bigforkbrands.com, use our code INFOGO at checkout, and get 20% off anything on the site.
You can find the link and our code in the show notes. So now that we're back, so what exactly was the three-fifths compromise? Well, it allocated congressional representation based on the total number of free persons and three-fifths of all other persons. So the fugitive slave clause ensured that escaping to another state would not grant freedom to an enslaved person. So Congress was allowed to outlaw the importation of enslaved individuals, but not until 1808. So the Fifth Amendment, which prohibits depriving any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law.
It was interpreted to consider enslaved individuals as property, as reinforced by the Dred Scott versus Sanford decision in 1857. Despite a culture of white supremacy, Northern states abolished slavery between 1777 and 1804, while the Southern slave population grew, reaching nearly 4 million by the Civil War's onset. President Lincoln recognized that the federal government's authority to end slavery in peacetime was constitutionally limited to individual states.
However, during the Civil War, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation under his authority as Commander-in-Chief. This proclamation declared enslaved individuals in rebellious states free as a war measure. So the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, well, referenced two 1862 statutes, but did not include statutory references in the final version, relying on Lincoln's presidential and military authority. So the proclamation did not apply to the broader states of Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware, which were not in rebellion, nor to West Virginia, which was in the process of, well, abolishing slavery while remaining part of the Union.
Contrary to popular belief, the Emancipation Proclamation did not free all slaves in the U.S. issued on January 1st, 1863. It applied only to the 10 Confederate states still in rebellion, leaving nearly 500,000 slaves in border states, Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware, and parts of Virginia and Louisiana unaffected. These areas were later addressed through separate state and federal actions. Specifically exempted regions included Tennessee, under Union control, 48 counties in Virginia, forming West Virginia, and 13 parishes in Louisiana, including New Orleans. These exemptions left an additional 300,000 slaves unemancipated.
So
So, in
basically,
total, that's 800,000 people.
and that's just what's documented. So we're probably talking around about a mill.
Right,
This is a million people that we're talking about.
right, as being treated as property.
Yeah. So the Emancipation Proclamation faced criticism, notably from Richard Hofstadter. Hofstadter?
Hofstadter.
Yeah, okay.
I would say, like, I think that would be German, so it would be Hofstadter.
Hofstadter? Okay, we'll go with that. He viewed it as inefficient in areas beyond its reach. However, William W. Freeling defended it as a strategic wartime measure. As the Union armies advanced, the proclamation resulted in substantial emancipation, committing the Union to ending slavery. Despite this process, slavery, well, it remained legal in some states until separate actions, and the 13th Amendment was ratified on December 18th, 1865, which permanently abolished slavery in the U.S.
But it did not abolish racism or any of that stuff
No,
at all.
no, I did not.
That was a whole other beast to tackle and still is being tackled today. Lincoln's moderate Reconstruction Plan required states like Louisiana to accept the proclamation and abolish slavery in their constitutions, influencing similar actions in Arkansas and Tennessee. Now, in Kentucky, Union Army commanders utilized the proclamation's offer of freedom to enlist slaves, significantly reducing the state's enslaved population. However, Delaware and Kentucky retained slavery until the 13th Amendment took effect.
We covered that in our,
Delaware episode.
yeah. So, and we need to get back to doing the states again.
Yeah, we left off, I think, on Pennsylvania.
Yeah, sorry everyone. We'll get back to that. In December 1861, President Lincoln delivered his first annual message to Congress. He supported legislation to address the status of contraband slaves and those in loyal states, suggesting federal funds to buy their freedom and endorsing federal funding for voluntary colonization. In January 1862, House Republican leader Thaddeus Stevens called for total war against the rebellion, including the emancipation of slaves to cripple the rebel economy.
On March 13th, 1862, Congress passed an act prohibiting the return of slaves, preventing military personnel from returning fugitive slaves to their owners. Lincoln signed a law abolishing slavery in the District of Columbia on April 16th, 1862, with compensation for owners. On June 19th, 1862, Congress banned slavery in all current and future U.S. territories, which Lincoln quickly signed into law. This act challenged the 1857 Supreme Court ruling in the Dred Scott case and rejected Stephen A. Douglas's popular sovereignty concept while confining slavery within existing state borders.
The first Confiscation Act of August 6, 1861, freed slaves employed against the U.S. government. The second act of July 17, 1862, well, it permanently freed slaves in rebel occupied areas and those that fled to Union lines. Lincoln maintained that while Congress lacked the power to free slaves in rebel states, he could do so as commander in chief if deemed a military necessity. And by summer of 1862, Lincoln had drafted the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation that he issued on September 22nd, 1862, declaring that slaves in rebellious states would be freed on January 1st, 1863.
So during that summer, abolitionists and editor Horace Greeley urged Lincoln to free all slaves. Greeley wrote an editorial demanding faster emancipation, arguing the rebellion would continue if slavery remained. Lincoln replied, emphasizing that his main goal was to save the Union. Whether that meant freeing all, some, or no slaves unknown to Greeley, Lincoln had already drafted the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, which he planned to issue after a Union military victory. This proclamation aimed to free slaves in rebellious states while keeping the Union intact.
Lincoln's letter to Greeley was a strategic move to address Northern white supremacist opposition to emancipation by tying it to the Union's cause. So during the 100 days between the preliminary and the final Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln continued to seek ways to save the Union while considering the possibility of freeing no slaves. He sent envoys to southern states to encourage loyalty and proposed a constitutional amendment offering compensation for states that abolished slavery.
Journalist Todd Brewster explained that Lincoln's focus on saving the Union was crucial to his legal authority for emancipation. He sought Attorney General Edward Bates' opinion on whether emancipated slaves could be re enslaved after the war, concluding they could remain free. Public opinion was divided, and emancipation was a risky political move. Lincoln faced opposition from Copperhead Democrats and uncertainty from border states. Despite challenges, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation was a key step toward ending slavery and preserving the Union.
And on July 1862, same year, Lincoln discussed the Emancipation Proclamation with his cabinet. He read his draft to Secretary of State William Seward and Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles. Initially, they were speechless. Seward worried about potential chaos in the South and foreign intervention, and on July 22nd, Lincoln presented it to the entire cabinet asking for their input. While the Secretary of War supported it, Seward advised issuing it after a Union victory to avoid seeming desperate.
In September 1862, the Battle of Antietam provided the victory Lincoln needed, and on September 22nd, 5 days after the battle, Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation promising to free slaves in rebellious states on January 1st, 1863. He used his authority as commander-in-chief as allowed by Congress, viewing it as a necessary war measure. The final proclamation issued on January 1st, 1863 could be revoked by Lincoln or future presidents. The proclamation initially freed only a small percentage of slaves, mainly those behind Union lines. It allowed freed slaves to join the U.S. military, with nearly 200,000 black men, mostly ex-slaves, contributing significantly to the Union's victory.
The proclamation also encouraged slaves to flee to Union lines. hastening the end of slavery.
Mhm.
While the proclamation exempted certain areas like West Virginia, Maryland, and Missouri, these states took separate actions to abolish slavery before the Civil War ever ended. And by early 1865, states like Tennessee, well, it too had also adopted measures to end slavery, culminating in the eventual abolition of slavery in the United States. Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in two parts, a preliminary version and the final version that he delivered in 1863 in January.
The preliminary proclamation declared that all slaves in Confederate states still in rebellion by January 1st, 1863 would be permanently freed. The final proclamation named the 10 affected states: South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Virginia, Arkansas, and North Carolina. It did not include the Union slave states of Maryland, Delaware, Missouri, and Kentucky, nor the already Union controlled Tennessee and certain Union occupied areas of Virginia and Louisiana. The proclamation took immediate effect in the Union areas like Winchester, Virginia, and the Sea Islands along the Carolinas and Georgia's coasts. New Year's Eve, 1862, African Americans held watch night ceremonies anticipating the promised freedom at midnight.
While some claimed the proclamation freed no slaves, it resulted in most slaves gaining freedom as the war continued. Celebrations took place in places like Hilton Head Island and Port Royal, South Carolina. The proclamation's immediate impact included freeing slaves in Union occupied zones and encouraging them to flee to Union lines. It also allowed freed slaves to join the U.S. military. The proclamation's immediate impact included freeing slaves in Union occupied zones, and it really boasted the U.S. military to help, enlisting, these black soldiers that really helped the Union solidify victory. While the 13th Amendment is often seen as the definitive end to slavery in the United States, several states didn't wait for its ratification to begin dismantling the institution.
In Maryland, Missouri, and Tennessee, emancipation came early, driven not by moral reckoning, but by intense Union political and military pressure. These states, each with their own internal divisions and strategic importance, became battlegrounds for freedom before the war had even ended. Maryland, perched on the Union's doorstep and bordering the nation's capital, was under constant scrutiny, with over 87,000 enslaved people in 1860. Its, econ- its economy was deeply entwined with slavery. By November 1864, the tide had turned. A new state constitution, pushed through the Unionist leaders and bolstered by absentee ballots from Union soldiers, narrowly passed abolishing slavery.
It was a razor thin victory, but a monumental one at that. Maryland's decision marked a dramatic shift in the identity and sent a powerful message. The war was not just about preserving the Union anymore, it was about redefining it. And in Missouri, the path to emancipation was forged through chaos. The state had been ravaged by guerrilla warfare and political infighting. But by January of 1865, radical Republicans and Unionists had seized control. At a state constitutional convention, they voted to abolish slavery, and Governor Thomas C. Fletcher made it official with an executive proclamation.
Missouri's move wasn't just about justice, it was about survival. Emancipation was seen as a way to stabilize the state and align it more firmly with the Union's version for the post war nation. Tennessee's story is perhaps the most paradoxical. Though it had seceded and joined the Confederacy, Union forces had reclaimed much of the state early in the war. At the helm was Andrew Johnson, a Southern Unionist who believed fiercely in emancipation.
With Union troops enforcing the transition, Tennessee became the first former Confederate state to officially end slavery, a symbolic and strategic victory for the Union cause. But not all border states followed suit. Delaware and Kentucky, despite their loyalty to the Union, they clung to slavery until the very end. Delaware, with a relatively small enslaved population, had multiple opportunities to abolish slavery, but it really rejected them all. Delaware even voted against the 13th Amendment in 1865 and didn't officially ratify it until 1901.
The resistance stemmed from conservative leadership and deep-seated fears of social upheaval, proof that proximity to the North didn't always mean progress. Kentucky's resistance was even more entrenched. With over 225,000 enslaved people in 1860, it had the largest enslaved population by any border state. The Emancipation Proclamation didn't apply there. The state leaders refused to act. Only when the 13th Amendment became law in December 1865 did slavery finally end in Kentucky.
Even then, many people in Kentucky, well, they opposed it, revealing a state torn between its Union alliances and its Southern sympathies. These contrasting stories reveal a deeper truth. Emancipation wasn't a single moment, but a fractured, state by state struggle shaped by war, politics, and the will to change or resist.
The Emancipation Proclamation marked a turning point in the war by making the North's goal not only preserving the Union, but also freeing the slaves. It rallied support from abolitionists and Europeans and encouraged enslaved people to escape to the North, weakening the South's labor force while strengthening the North's ranks. Copperhead Democrats who opposed the war criticized the Emancipation Proclamation, claiming it was unconstitutional and encouraged violence. They argued it endangered white men's freedom and went against nature and history. Racism was widespread on both sides, and some in the North only supported the war to keep the South in the Union.
War Democrats, who disagreed with the Copperheads, saw the proclamation as a useful military tool, but they were concerned it might lower soldiers' morale. Lincoln also suspended habeas corpus around the same time, causing further opposition. In the 1862 elections, Democrats gained seats in the House and won the governorship in New York. Some saw this as a sign of trouble for Lincoln, but others believe most Northern voters, well, they still supported his policies.
The Confederacy reacted with outrage, fearing slave revolts and increased morale among Union soldiers. Confederate leaders threatened retaliation against black U.S. soldiers captured in battle. Internationally, the Emancipation Proclamation shifted foreign opinion in favor of the Union, making it harder for the Confederacy to gain support from countries like Britain and France. Overall, the proclamation marked a turning point, making the war about both preserving the Union and ending slavery. So the Emancipation Proclamation was not the final blow to slavery, but it was the turning point of the tide.
It signaled to a divided nation and to the world that the United States was not only fighting for its survival, but for its soul. President Lincoln once said, in giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free. Wow, that's pretty powerful. Those words, well, they echo across generations because they remind us that the fight for justice, true justice, we're talking true justice here, is never just one group. It's about the kind of nation we want it to be. It took courage, it took sacrifice, and it took time.
But from the ink of Lincoln's pen to the ratification of the 13th Amendment, the arc of history bent a little more toward freedom for all. As we reflect on the Emancipation Proclamation, it reminded us that progress begins not with perfection, but with purpose and dedication. And that moment in our darkest hours, bold action and moral clarity can change the course of history. Although the Emancipation Proclamation was issued in 1863, enslaved people in Texas didn't learn of it until June 19th, 1865, now celebrated as Juneteenth.
Now you know. So why does this still matter? Because the Emancipation Proclamation isn't just a historical artifact, it's a mirror. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Who benefits when justice is delayed? Who decides when freedom is practical? And how often do moral breakthroughs come disguised as political compromises?
Juneteenth reminds us that freedom delayed is still freedom denied. And that information, who controls it and who hears it and when, can change lives. History doesn't just tell us where we've been, it warns us what happens when progress is resisted and what becomes possible when courage outweighs fear.
Wow, I did not know that Delaware. Well, I did know that because we talked about it in our Delaware episode, but that's crazy that they held on to slavery. They didn't ratify the 13th Amendment until 1901.
Right. And then they didn't even get rid of segregation until the 60s or 70s.
Yeah, 36 years after the 13th Amendment. I found it interesting that Tennessee, being a Confederate state, was the first to abolish slavery before the 13th Amendment.
I I don't know. I don't really have any comments on that. I think the idea of treating people in general as property is abhorrent, and I just don't understand why it took so long for it to be officially abolished, other than greed and control, which we still have today.
I would agree with that. I don't think, history is weird all the way around when it comes to stuff like that. But, in 1860s America, I agree. I don't know why it took that long. I mean, there was so many different people opposing it. To your point, I don't think humans owning humans is no, nowhere on this planet should that be allowed.
Agreed. Agreed. Unless you've done something horribly wrong.
Well, that's called prison, right?
Right. Right.
Okay, that's a
Indeed.
totally different thing.
Yes, but that was the basis was you are free unless you are in jail.
Okay. I found this one to be very interesting. You know, the Emancipation Proclamation, a lot of people do think that, hey, this is what freed slaves, but it's actually not. But it was the steps for the 13th Amendment.
It
Which,
definitely opened the door for freedom for all to actually ring true.
yeah, absolutely. And I think Lincoln he had to do a lot of politicking to actually get the 13th Amendment passed.
Indeed, he had to do lots of side quests to boost his reputation.
So, the greatest president in American history, hands down, Abraham Lincoln. He's also in the Wrestling Hall of Fame.
I wonder what our founding fathers would think about our society today.
They're different times. So,
That's true. That's true. There's a lot of technology advancement.
well, not only that, different ways of thinking. You got to think like throughout history, thinking has evolved and perspectives have evolved, and we're more inclusive than we've ever been in any part of history, in my opinion. Not saying that we're totally inclusive. I'm just saying that we're more inclusive now than we've ever been because we're more connected to the world than we've ever been.
Right, and each other for the most part.
Oh gosh, we're always on. Everybody is always on.
Hmm.
All the social media and the data centers. Oh, we need to do one on data centers.
Oh God, yeah, that's a big one right now.
It is. We need to do that.
Indeed.
Not to take away from Juneteenth. I,
Absolutely not.
yeah, but now you know why Juneteenth is celebrated. Like Kat said, it enslaved people in Texas didn't learn about it until June 19th, 1865, which is why Juneteenth is a thing.
That sounds awesome.
That's all I've got.
If you would like to support this podcast,
Tell a friend and help get the word out.
as always, William and I want to thank you for listening.
Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Do I need to put the one in here, or do you just want to go off the cuff? No,
Um, oh, this is like the old one.
I'm telling you, I told you it was digging deep in the archives.
I'm sorry. I was just like, wait, that's not what it says, but that's what I'm supposed to say. I'm confused. Do I keep going? Keep going.
Yeah, this one, I want to say this one was we missed last Juneteenth, so we decided to wait a year. So this one's been sitting there collecting dust.
Ugh. So if you would like to support this podcast, tell a friend and help get the word out.
If you would like to help us support the show, you can do so at Patreon. Kat and I are going to start doing some fabulous things over there. Or you can take advantage of some of our sponsors. All of those links are in the show notes.
And as always, William and I want to thank you for listening.
Whether you've been with us from day one or just tuning in, that's a big thank you.
Join the Facebook group at Info on the Go
Over there, you can get to know us.
or ask us a question.
But like we said at the beginning of this episode, Make sure you hit that follow button wherever you're listening to this podcast, please.
Pretty please. And you can send us some fan mail using the link in the show notes or leave a review.
And we love both of those, fan mail and reviews. Leaving that review, well, it helps others find us in the sea of podcast. But if you want, you can email Kat or myself directly at
infoonthegopodcast@gmail.com.
and we read all of those, including the spam emails.
Indeed, all of the spam emails thinking it's fan mail.
Yeah, we do get spam mail quite a good bit here lately. But all of this is in the show notes. Till next time,
Stay curious.
however you celebrate Juneteenth.
I hope you enjoy.
There you go. If your stomach's been off lately, like bloating, reflux, or just not feeling right, there's a simpler way to get back on track.
With Professor B's Digestive Aid, which is an all natural blend of pure honey and ancient apitherapy, a herb rooted in Roman tradition. You know how at least they had some things right, right? It's designed to gently support and balance your digestion.
No long ingredient list, no harsh additives, just two powerful, time tested ingredients working together. It's even the same formula used to help cancer patients manage digestive discomfort.
And right now, you can get an exclusive 10% off any product. Just use our code INFOGO at checkout.